Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Iwona Słynczewska-Knap, and I have a great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of ABSL. Before we start, I would like to share some technical information with you. The whole meeting will be recorded. Ashu, if you can change the slide. In order to ensure that the webinar runs smoothly, please remain muted during the whole meeting. If you would like to raise a question or share your views, please raise a hand and wait until you are asked. You may also share your thoughts, opinion, and question in the chat box. And once again, please note that the webinar is recorded. We will share the link to the video immediately after the meeting. We are meeting today as a part of a Working Together program. Based on your expectation, together with you, we built the year-round program. Together with you, we selected the topics: managing culture diversity in the workplace, inclusive recruitment, which we will be focusing on today, inclusion and diversity as a driver supporting employee engagement and career development, language ethics, and inclusive employer branding. During the next webinar on inclusion and diversity as a driver supporting employee engagement and career development, we will focus on experts' personal experience and perspective on evolving inequalities through their career, where we are now, what progress can they observe, ways to reduce inequality in the workplace regarding development opportunities, chances of promotion, and equal pay, barriers to making more progress in equality in the workplace, companies' initiatives addressing increasing vulnerabilities for women in the workplace during the pandemic, BSS perspective on women's situation during the pandemic, inclusive equal parenting rights for women and men, as well as equality and discrimination-free workplace best practices. How can you engage? The next time we will be meeting, your story might be presented. So please, if you have anything interesting, anything you would like to share with us, contact us. You can also submit your story, your case study through Call of Papers. At the end of the year, we will publish white paper of best practices. Your story might be presented there. So I think it's time to focus on our today's topic. Let me present our distinguished speaker. The first one is Sarah Cheney, Global Head Talent, Experience, Inclusion and People Analytics from Adecco Group. Then Matthew Smith, Lead Resourcing Relationship Manager, West Region Group Talent from Standard & Chartered. And our friends from law company Wiatr, Anna Berger, trainee advocate, Labor Law Department, Joanna Kalinowska, advocate, head of International Entities Department, and Rafał Wiatr, attorney law, managing partner and co-owner, law company Wiatr and Partnerzy Kancelaria Radców Prawnych. So let me hand over to our keynote speaker, Sarah. Sarah, the stream is yours. Before you start, I just once again kindly ask all participants to stay muted. Thank you very much. Sarah?
Thank you so much, and hello everybody. It's lovely to be here, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. So exactly as introduced, my name is Sarah Cheney and I'm the Global Head of Talent Experience, Inclusion and People Analytics at the Adecco Group. So just breaking that down a little bit, I'm responsible for employee branding for colleagues coming into our business. I also look after diversity and inclusion and actually well-being across the group. And lastly, I take care of people analytics, which for us splits into our Peakon engagement survey that we run every quarter, and also the people and data analytics of our colleagues moving around the business. For those of you who are not familiar with the Adecco Group, I'm just going to do a very, very quick introduction. We are one of the world's leading global HR solutions providers. So that really means we offer a variety of HR services to our clients and our customers. And this is delivered through our ecosystem of brands. So this is anything from recruitment itself to recruitment provider outsourcing services, to upskilling, training, development, reskilling, and also to outsourcing. So across that end-to-end spectrum of the HR life cycle. We operate in around 60 territories or countries globally, and we have around 34,000 what we call colleagues, which is our employees. And so really the population I'm responsible for across those topics is looking at our colleagues, the people that work for us and our brands, and not necessarily our associates, which are the people we hire for our clients. So I just want to make that distinction because I'll use the word colleagues a lot. So I'm going to share some of our story today with you and what we're doing in this space. Obviously, being an HR solutions provider, it's important that we practice what we preach and that we lead by example. And so in the area of diversity and inclusion, we have some very strong ambitions for where we'd like to take this journey. Before I kind of go into exactly what we're doing in this space, I just wanted to set a little bit of context and really talk about why this was important and bring to light some of the other considerations that we need to have as a result of everything that's happened over the past year, which we would be remiss not to talk about. Firstly, looking at the left-hand side of the slide, we need to make sure we're very clear on the business value that this brings. And I think, this is familiar to everyone. I could probably have done 10 pages of data as to why it's important to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. We think about innovation, diversity of thought, candidate and colleague satisfaction, how we can make faster decisions better, reflecting our clients and our customers truly across the globe and making sure we're representing them with our diverse workforce. There are many, many, many reasons as to why it is important that we have not only inclusive hiring practices, but also that we have a truly diverse workforce within our organisations. But I also wanted to look at the impact of COVID. We've obviously all gone through a lot in the last year and a half, and we are still in that experience and that situation right now. But of course, this has had a massive impact on many things within the working environment, and recruitment is absolutely one of those. We have a catchphrase that we're using as part of one of our COVID principles, and that's don't waste a crisis. We put our people first. We make sure we support and care for our clients and our customers, and we don't waste the crisis. And so we're looking also at what is the impact that COVID has had on some of these hiring practices. So firstly, if we start on how people are working, of course, we're now all in this remote world, this virtual world, and we're moving into more hybrid ways of working where we get a balance of being in an office space or in a remote location, be that at home or offsite somewhere else. And this opens up so much more opportunity, not only in the ways that we're working, but actually how we're recruiting people into our business. We've seen an increase of around, I think it's 73% or so, of job searches looking for remote working opportunities now. So we're changing the way our careers websites work and our ATS works to offer those remote working options, looking at where we can have people positioned around the world, contributing to our career opportunities. And I think that has a huge effect and impact on inclusion because it's opening up more opportunities to a broader range of talent. So we're really broadening out our talent pools, and where we once had this war for talent, which will always be there in the background, I think now we're able to be a lot more creative with who we're looking for and where we're offering some of those career experiences. So this is definitely something we're taking into account when we look at how we do recruitment and who we're targeting for certain positions and how those positions are actually now being presented and promoted. We also have things like what we call portfolio careers, which I'll explain a little bit. This is really new ways of working. If we look at all of the opportunities that we have gained from the past year, if we're looking at the positive impact of it, is really the different types of career portfolio we can offer to our employees. So this is things like more flexible working, job shadowing, project work, being able to move our people around more agilely within the business and get different types of career experiences. This opens up new opportunities for, say, working parents, for example, who maybe want to partly share a role with somebody else and they can do 50-50 each. So what we're really trying to do when we don't waste a crisis is look at what are the new opportunities that we can create. And again, how does that impact our recruitment and hiring processes to ensure we're reaching a broader and more diverse population of individuals. And then we have the changing needs of the candidates themselves. What are potential employees actually looking for in our business? And for me, this goes beyond the recruitment process, but has a massive impact on, again, how we're hiring and what we're hiring for, making sure we're really clear on those opportunities and what those working experiences will look like. So, for example, if we think about the difference between men and women, we did some research for workforce transformation as a result of the impact of COVID. And we can see that women are now looking for much more flexible working opportunities and, of course, an increased balance of that hybrid working model. Whereas a lot of men are actually saying, no, we're expecting to transition back into the office, but what we're focusing on is, of course, the health and well-being and the safety of those office environments. So these two differing perspectives we now need to take into account and consider when we're looking at things like our office space. How do we reposition our office space to meet the needs of these candidates as they're transitioning into this hybrid working model? In addition to that, the remote working as well. How do we make sure that we're really utilising that office space for more collaborative connectivity and team activity, so that when we're together, we're really keeping that cultural aspect, whereas some of that siloed working is really staying at home or in a remote location where you don't necessarily need to be in the physical space. All of this has an impact on our hiring processes because we need to think beyond actually how we're bringing this talent in, but actually what are the experiences and workplace experiences they're going to get when they're within our organisation. So for us, when we talk about inclusive recruitment and inclusive hiring, it's really important that we look at that end-to-end life cycle and really think about all of the different things that are going to impact the decisions we make at the front end. The last point on this slide I just wanted to mention was this concept of diversity and inclusion versus inclusion and diversity. Whilst today we're obviously focusing on the hiring process itself and that first part of that experience, bringing people into the organisation, we very much believe at the Adecco Group that diversity does not work without inclusion. Once you're bringing that diverse population in, what's the experience that they're going to get? What's the culture? What's the environment? How are they going to thrive and grow across your organisation? And so it's equally important that you put as much emphasis on creating that inclusive environment and culture with that sense of belonging for employees so that they can grow and succeed within your business before you even look at how you actually bring that diverse talent into your organisation. So on the next slide, it's really just a little bit about where we are in our journey. And this is a very high level overview of kind of our diversity and inclusion agenda. And I think it makes sense just to set some context as to what we're prioritising across the group. So firstly, for us, our corporate vision is genuinely to make the world of work for everyone. And by everyone, we mean everyone. And so we have a diversity and inclusion slogan around we believe in talent and not labels. And it is very much embedded and tied into our corporate vision and mission. For us, that's around looking at things like our recruitment processes, which we'll dive into in a minute. But also, as I said, making sure we're driving that continuous culture of education, learning, dialogue, and making sure that we're role modelling the right behaviours and mindsets across all of our colleague population. And also looking at our processes and our tools, enabling accessibility, inequality and equity for all, and really driving that sense of belonging through those processes and the technology tools and policies that we introduce, particularly from the HR space. So our agenda is really split into 4 key areas, and I'm very keen to emphasize that this will change. This changes over time. This is not a static agenda. As we make progress, we continue to evolve this agenda and what these priorities look like. So first, we start with our inclusive leadership, not only looking at the physical representation of our leadership, but also, again, going back to that role modeling mindset. How are they behaving? What is their mindset? And how are they really leading from the top when it comes to driving that inclusive culture? This is where a lot of our gender work is done, because we have a commitment with Paradigm for Parity to achieve gender equality 50-50 in our leadership levels by 2030. And so we've done a lot of work around gender equality within our leadership levels, as well as a lot of training for how we adjust our ways of working at a leadership level, again, taking into account the impact of COVID. Secondly, we have our consciously inclusive pillar. And this is, as I mentioned, that enduring education, that ongoing dialogue and conversation. How do we continuously drive an environment and a culture that takes inclusion into mind, allowing people to share their thoughts, their perspectives, their reflections in a safe environment, but making sure it's something that we do in a continuous fashion rather than just a once-off here and there when it becomes topical. Thirdly, which is really where the inclusive hiring topic comes in, we have what we call equity by design or inclusive-led design. We as a business are going through a transformation at the moment. And in addition, of course, we have the impact of COVID on our ways of working. And what both of those have really called for is a review in a lot of our HR processes, tools and technology. So as we are redesigning some of those processes, we are now putting inclusion at the forefront of that design process and making sure that we are designing with inclusion in mind. And I think the recruitment processes that we're introducing is really a good example of this, and that's what I'll cover off in the next slide. And then lastly, of course, this topic of well-being. For us, this sits under our inclusion agenda, making sure everyone can feel their best and bring their best self to work every day, and looking across that holistic spectrum of mental, physical, emotional, social, and purpose around those wellbeing topics. And that is something that we are reinventing for this year, given the impact of COVID and some of the pressures that our people are feeling that we can see through the analytics that we collect. So that's a little bit around where our priority areas focus on. And for me, my role as the global head of inclusion is really to ensure that those foundations are there so that when our countries do some of the fantastic initiatives that they run with certain populations and certain demographics of our colleagues, they really have those foundations in place to be able to leverage and actually build upon rather than having to kind of try and build them themselves. So it gives them that consistent platform to then do much more specific initiatives at the country level. And that's really what we're trying to prioritise here. So moving on to the next slide, what are we doing with the recruitment side of things? I apologise, this is a very busy slide, but I will talk you through it. So as part of that third pillar of inclusive-led design, one of the things that we are in the process of reviewing and reinventing is that of our recruitment processes for all of our colleagues. So on average, we hire between around 10,000, 12,000 new colleagues each year, and that is to contribute to our overall population of around 34,000 colleagues. We are using our own brand. So we have a brand called Pontoon, who provide what we call RXO, Recruitment Experience Outsourcing Services. So they will be supporting us with the end-to-end recruitment lifecycle of our colleagues or potential colleagues going forward. And as we redesign this process, taking into account our own transformation and the impact of COVID, as I mentioned, we want to ensure we design with inclusion in mind. And this is really what that process is looking like at a very high level. So we are taking into account everything from the process itself, but also the technology that we use, and then of course the behaviours and the dialogue that we are sharing across this end-to-end process. So if we start at the beginning, it's firstly ensuring that we're clear on what types of roles that we're offering. Going back to my previous slide around the impact of COVID and the types of role opportunities that we can now present, such as portfolio careers or remote working, we need to make sure that we really have a very clear agenda of what exactly those roles look like across all of our various locations. Then we move into our job descriptions. And this is something that we have done in, quite frankly, a very siloed fashion before. A lot of our countries have really owned their own job descriptions, and there's been no global consistency on this. Now we're really looking at a lot of our volume roles and our niche and hard to fill roles, and taking into account what type of technology can we use to support with those job descriptions, particularly taking into account neutral language, or gender neutral language to be specific. Looking at the language that we use and ensuring that we're not going too masculine with that language and equally not too feminine. How do we get a good balance of what that job entails, being as authentic and transparent as possible, but again, leveraging technology to support us and make sure that the language is both appealing and descriptive to the candidates viewing it. Then we move into the sourcing process. So what channels are we really finding these candidates through? How do we get a good balance of global channels like a LinkedIn or a Glassdoor or Indeed versus some of the more specific country channels that we're looking at? So diverse job boards, for example, being clear on the criteria for which channels of engagement are utilised as well. This is something we have not had as much structure on in the past, so we want to be much more deliberate about the channels that we're using and ensure that we're reaching a much broader range of candidates within that recruitment process. Then we move into our CV screening, and something we're very keen and excited to introduce is that of redacted CVs or neutral or anonymous CVs. So really stripping back any of that personal identifiable information from a CV so that we're really focusing on the candidate's skills, their talent, their experience, and their contributions to the role. This is something that we've had many conversations about because, of course, there are lots of challenges in this process, to be very transparent. You can certainly strip that information from the CV itself so that we're just focusing on the skills and talent. But of course, when you hand that information over to a hiring manager, one of the typical activities that they might do is, of course, go onto LinkedIn to find out more about this candidate. So we're really looking at that process in a lot more detail right now to say what are the steps that need to be taken at what point in time to ensure that we keep this as anonymous and redacted as possible for that first part of the journey. Of course, as we move down that selection process, that's when we will start to get to know the candidates. But for those first steps of filtering, we want to make sure we're basing it purely on talent and skill sets and fit with the role and not on any other identifiable information. When we come to internal mobility, this is one that sits very much for inclusion with us as well. Again, thinking about moving from this slightly siloed and geographical model to a more global process. Internal mobility is very important for us. We do have a very large ecosystem of brands, and we want to ensure that our own colleagues are growing within our business, moving around our brand ecosystem and getting renewed experiences at every touch point of their career life cycle. Where we've had issues in the past is maybe slightly discrepancies in how people are able to move around. When are they able to move? At what point in their career can they move? And also, what's the process that sits behind that? So we're now looking into that process to say, how can we make that more consistent for all so that that internal opportunity for growth is equal for everyone across our business? What is the time process that they need to be within their current role before they can move to another role? And what is the process that sits behind how they actually make that move? Looking for the opportunity, informing their manager that they're interested to grow and move on to a new opportunity, and also the actual selection process itself, acknowledging that they're already part of our business and we want them to stay part of our business, so we don't need to take them through a full process again. Moving on to the actual process of the recruitment. So ensuring that it is fair and equal for all, making sure we're not putting some people through 5 steps of a process where others only have to go through 3 steps. If we're doing video interviews, how are they accessible to everybody? How do we ensure that everyone has accessibility to the technology that they need to be able to take part in our recruitment process? And if they don't, what are the alternatives that we have to ensure that they're still heard in a fair and consistent manner? So we're really breaking down all parts of the process to really analyse exactly what it is we do currently, and is that really a necessary step? And if that is a necessary step, what is the technology that we use? What is the steps that we have that sit behind it to ensure it's accessible and easy for everyone to take part in, rather than being heavy and arduous and complicated? Panel interviews is another thing we're looking at. So rather than that decision, that ultimate decision sitting with just a hiring manager, we want to ensure that we're getting a more varied set of opinions across that decision-making process. So introducing the likes of panel interviews, where you maybe have 2 or 3 individuals doing that final assessment and interview and making those decisions, so that there is a range of inputs reflected in that decision-making process. And it's important as well to note that not only should it be a range of people, but actually the range of people should be diverse in themselves as well. So they shouldn't all necessarily be from the same team, but maybe others that can have an opinion on the type of role, who would be a good fit for it, and can give a good perspective to the hiring manager to make sure it is a fair and unbiased opinion in making that final decision. Use of assessments as well is something that we're looking at. So as we do assessments, we use our partners at SHL for this. How can we make sure that, again, all of that technology is accessible to everyone? Be that increasing the font size of the assessment, changing the background colour, being able to use the readout technology if you have vision impairments, making sure that, again, every step of this journey is led with inclusion in mind, and that we're really thinking about the journey and the experience of the candidate, so that they are feeling comfortable throughout this entire hiring process. And then lastly, something that's very important for me, both across diversity and inclusion, but actually also the employer branding aspect of my role as well, is that of the behavioural training that we provide to our recruiters and to our hiring managers. How do we ensure that they are representing our organisation in the right way, that they're bringing our employee value proposition to life in the conversations and the dialogue that they're having with candidates, and equally in the information or the questions that they are asking or information they're providing to candidates, they are, again, leading with inclusion in mind, the language that they use, the questions that they ask, the decisions that they're making, the information they're providing. And so we're building out quite a robust, what we call an inclusive license to hire program, where before any of our recruiters or hiring managers can actually access a candidate or go and interview them, they have to go through this training program. And this is a combination of facilitated training, of where we train the trainer sessions for all of our regions, so that they can roll this training out with their recruiters, and also a combination of nudges, what we call inclusive nudges. So the likes of podcasts or quick checklists that they have to look at before they go into that recruitment process, just to make sure they're refreshing their memory on exactly how it is that they should be behaving through these interactions and touch points. So quite a lot there, but I think a huge amount of opportunity to really drive inclusion throughout that end-to-end process. To what extent and how this is done for every single country and every single role is really what comes as part of that planning process. And we're in that 6-month planning process now. But I think it's very important that we note that there are so many areas of opportunity across that end-to-end process where we can lead with inclusion in mind. And these are just some of the examples of what we're looking at the Adecco Group and how we can bring that to life. So on the last slide, just being conscious of time, I just wanted to give you some key takeaways, really. So as I said at the beginning, obviously we're talking here about hiring and inclusive recruitment, but I would urge you just to think about prioritising the inclusive culture as much as getting that diverse workforce. You can put so much energy into that first process and bringing them in, but if you don't have that inclusive culture where they can thrive, grow and succeed and feel like they belong, then you're going to lose those people and you're going to have to start that whole process all over again. So definitely make sure you're thinking about the two in parallel. As I've said, consider all aspects of the inclusive hiring process, that full end-to-end spectrum, and where do all of those opportunities lie, and also take into account what are the other opportunities that have now been opened up as a result of COVID. Don't waste a crisis. Make sure you're thinking about how your recruitment processes, but also your recruitment offerings will change as a result of the COVID impact, and what does that really mean for the designing that you will need to do as a result of that. And then lastly, something I haven't really spoken about, but is very, very important, is the significance, but also the challenge of data. It is so important and imperative that we collect as much data and analytics as possible to inform how successful these processes and changes that we're making are. Now, in the area of diversity and inclusion, and I think we could have a whole other session on this, but obviously this is a challenge because of privacy laws, what data can be collected, stored and actually asked at different countries, within different countries. And this is something we're working through at the moment. Within that RXO solution that we're introducing, how can we collect relevant data to show whether these processes and whether these changes we're making are actually going to be successful. And equally, how do we link that data in internally? So when we think about our HR information system, HRIS products, how are we ensuring that we're continuously measuring that diversity and inclusion data to show that not only are we bringing that diverse talent in through those hiring processes, but equally that diverse talent is then staying within our business and being able to grow, move and progress across our ecosystem. So this is a big, big topic, but something that I think is equally imperative, as well as making sure that you've got that process defined in a clear and articulate way. So that is it from me. Thank you very much. A whistle-stop tour of what we're looking at, and I very much appreciate the time to speak to you today. I think we have an opportunity for questions now, but otherwise I'll wait till later.
Thank you, Sarah. So we do have an opportunity. You a little bit found. It was absolutely amazing. So I strongly encourage our participants to ask you a question through the chat, and we will still have 10 minutes for a discussion and Q&A session at the end. So if you forgive me, I will ask now Matt to join us and give him a space to present his story, Inclusive Recruitment at Standard Chartered. Matt, the stream is yours.
Thank you and good morning, everybody.
Matt, I'm you.
Can you hear me now, Joanna?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Bear with me just a second. Let me just see if I can get my camera to work. There we go. Hopefully you'll be able to see me there. Okay, so I'm going to try and follow Sarah's great presentation, and hopefully they'll not repeat too much, although there will be some crossover with some of the things that we see at Standard Chartered and that we are doing as well. And firstly, look, my name is Matt Smith. My title isn't particularly great, so I'm effectively the regional recruitment manager for Europe, Americas, Africa, the Middle East, and Pakistan for Standard Chartered. Today's session is about inclusive recruitment, but before I dive into the detail, I'd like to share a little about Standard Chartered for those that don't know us, tell you a bit about our approach to diversity and inclusion, why we believe it's important, and some of the actions that we've taken as an organisation, many of which I'm sure will resonate across other companies, industries, and countries as well. I'm then going to focus on our recruitment process, some of the things that we've actually done that I've been involved in, share some of the steps that we've taken to make our process fair, robust and unbiased, and then cover off some simple hints and tips. So for those that don't know Standard Chartered, so we're an international bank. We have about 85,000 employees across about 59 markets, and we service 150 markets. I mean, in previous years, we would normally make somewhere between 18 and 20,000 permanent hires every year, both internal and external. Now, COVID had a big impact on us last year, and it saw that number fall to about 13,000 hires. And our footprint, as you can tell from the number of markets that we cover, and from my introduction, is really broad. And that provides us a real unique opportunity to harness diversity. And as Sarah mentioned, and I really like, Sarah, by the way, the idea of diversity and inclusion versus inclusion and diversity. That's really made me think about how we approach things at Standard Chartered. But for us, we talk about, and our purpose talks to diversity and inclusion. And our purpose is this, to drive commerce and prosperity through our unique diversity. And we feel as an organization that given the markets that we operate in, that we are uniquely placed to harness diversity. And that for us means we need to be an inclusive organization. And it's something that runs all the way through the organization. It means more to us than just a characteristic like gender or ethnicity. For us, it's about recognizing individuals and what they bring. As Sarah mentioned before, it's that diversity of thought and experience and using that to innovate and evolve our organization. Now, some other quick stats before I move on to talk about inclusive recruitment and what we're doing. So we currently have about at last look 50 employee resource groups, so ERGs as we call them internally. And those groups are set up to connect and support colleagues. And it's one of the ways for us to maintain and to have an inclusive organization. So some of those groups will be related to things like gender equality, LGBT plus. We've got the One Network, which is linked to racial equality. So we have a large number of those, as I say, which are about connecting and supporting our colleagues. We've done things like roll out flexi working, which again, Sarah talked about it in some really nice detail about the impact of COVID and what that's meant. Now, we had a flexi working policy previously, but actually that's been fast forwarded to where we are today with a hybrid working model where all staff can split their time, or the majority of them at least can split their time between working from home and working from an office. We have a fair pay policy. We have a leave policy that's for all parents. And we've signed up to a number of commitments about representation of our staff. Now, the big one that for anyone that follows Standard Chartered is the Women in Finance Charter, which we signed up to a number of years ago. And that was to get us to 30% of women across the top 4 levels of roles by the end of 2020, which we managed. We've increased that target as we move forward, so we're continuing that journey. Now, that's a bit of a snapshot about Standard Chartered. But what I'd like to do is move if we can move to the next slide, to talk about some of the risks and traps that we can fall into when thinking about inclusive and diverse recruitment. Now, for me, one of the biggest risks that we face is bias. Whether it's a conscious or an unconscious bias, both can have a major impact on the outcome of a recruitment process. And that in turn has a significant impact on an organization. As it was covered off before, diverse organizations, inclusive organizations are more innovative and perform better. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of the biases and some of those other common traps that hiring managers and recruiters can fall into. Now, firstly, we're all drawn to people like us. It's basic human nature. We want to be around and surround ourselves with people that we like and are just like us. And that can follow into recruitment. We look for things we like, whether it's a university or a company that we believe is better, and we place a value on that. So that individual in front of us is considered to be better because the company that I think is a better company, or the university that they attended is a better university. And there used to be, back in my previous days when I looked after the graduate and early careers side of things, in the UK, we used to focus on red brick universities, and these were a traditional group of universities that everybody assumed were better, and therefore candidates that came from them were better. Now, that effect is often known as the halo effect. Can present itself in a number of different ways as well. So the way in the first impression that we derive of somebody, and the phrase is an English phrase, to not judge a book by its cover. And that for me typifies the halo effect. It's making that first impression and placing a value upon it. Anchoring bias is another form of bias, where we focus or rely heavily on one piece of information and using it as a benchmark for a baseline or comparison. So for example, in a recruitment process, if the first candidate that takes an assessment performed particularly well, that could set the bar so high that every other candidate that we compare looks underqualified in comparison just because of that one assessment. Now, we all know that it's often easier to remember something that's just happened. The older I get, the more that happens. I can't remember things that have gone on too far back. And this can manifest itself in a recruitment process in more recent events being weighted more heavily. So in a longer recruitment process, that could lead to candidates that were interviewed earlier on being seen and assessed less favourably than those that were later in the process. Now, they're just a couple of the biases that can find their way into recruitment. And for anyone that is interested, if you Google bias in recruitment, you could spend hours and hours going down a rabbit hole of information that is there to talk about bias and the different types of biases that exist and that can find their way into a recruitment process. And they can lead, unless they are addressed, to losing out on the best candidates, stifling creativity, thinking, and innovation within a company. Now, I also wanted to raise something that's, for me, a danger that comes with trying to overcompensate to ensure diversity and inclusion, and particularly on the diversity point, and that's quotas. Now, I talked about the fact that we'd signed up for the Women in Finance Charter. Now, the fact that we'd signed up and effectively attached a target to a population of our internal staff could be perceived that that's about filling a quota or ticking a box, rather than the benefits of having a diverse workforce by hiring the best candidates that offer diverse thinking. At times that can be put into a box that says we're trying to fill a quota, and that can lead to the wrong type of behaviours. And I've seen one particular example where we've had a reverse discrimination case, not at Standard Charter, but a previous organisation. We've had a reverse discrimination case from a candidate who raised it against the firm because they were told by an agency, so by one of our vendors, that they were not being put forward or they weren't successful for a role because they were the wrong gender. So it was a male candidate that raised a discrimination case against us. That's completely at odds with the real reason that the candidate was declined. And it's obviously not great that that vendor took that route because it wasn't correct. But that target that we aspire to can be perceived the wrong way and therefore lead to those types of behaviours. Now, I want to move on and share some of what we've done at Standard Chartered to address some of these biases, and also to talk a bit more about how we've tried to ensure that we have an inclusive recruitment process. Now, I often talk to HR directors and business heads about 3 routes to impact inclusion and diversity across the resourcing lifecycle. And for me, those 3 things are as follows. One of them is EVP, or employee value proposition. So that message in the market about who we are, what we stand for, what it's like to work here. Then there's candidate sourcing and where we go to find those candidates, that funnel that we open up, the vendors that we use, the job boards that we use, the organizations that we connect with. And then there's the process that's followed to assess those candidates. And that process should be one that's fair, robust, it's unbiased in the assessment of candidates. So in recognizing those 3 areas, I wanted to talk a bit about what we've tried to do to ensure that we're inclusive. Now, it's fair to say for Standard Chartered, I've been at SCB, as we all call it internally. I've been here for just over 4 years, and the organisation, the resourcing organisation, has changed massively in that time. We've gone through a global target operating model review where we've tried to align all of our teams, processes, procedures, tools on a globalised level to ensure that level of consistency. And some of how that's played out, if I think about our EVP, we've just completed a huge refresh of our website, a dedicated diversity and inclusion page where we share stories from some of our people, showcase some of the initiatives that we've signed up to, and generally to talk about how seriously, we take diversity and inclusion. You know, building that outreach across social media channels by dedicated pages on some of the job boards that we use. When thinking about the sourcing and candidate funnel, myself, my teams, the other teams that look after our other countries and regions, we've spent time engaging with our vendors we've had a massive review of our vendors over the last couple of years that we do engage with. Those that we do work with, we've engaged them to help them understand their role. Now, vendors are ambassadors for our organisation. So ensuring that they understand the key messages about who we are as an organisation, how we view the individuals we want to bring in, what our approach to diversity and inclusion is hugely important. We've also worked really hard to add some targeted vendors that specialise in diverse candidates, whether that's female specialist agencies, BAME agencies, or even ex-military. You know, this isn't just about the normal characteristics. It is about ensuring that we open that candidate funnel, as I like to call it, to the broadest population possible to find the best candidates. Now, the last one is process, and that's where, for me, we've made the biggest difference particularly over the last 12 months as an organisation. Now, we've had a global refresh of our interview and assessment process and tools, and I've led part of that refresh. We've launched an interview matrix, which sets the minimum standard of interviews, number of interviewers, number of skills or competencies that are assessed to drive that consistency of candidate experience, to place structure, which Sarah talked about earlier on, and process in the way in which we assess candidates. We're about to launch, as soon as I get them back from an agency, some refreshed interview guides. So those guides align to our skills framework. So we don't have competencies at Standard Chartered. We have a set of skills. They're broadly the same thing. It's a competency framework, and it's the way in which we assess all of our roles and therefore use to assess our candidates. Those refreshed guides are aligned to our skills framework. They provide a structure and consistency in the way in which we assess candidates, and in conjunction with that interview matrix, ensures that candidates are all assessed in the same way, and that structure, that process is consistent. Each manager asks the same set of questions to all of the candidates. Managers are aligned individual competencies or skills to assess, so that there is a diverse set of interviewers. We include diversity as one part of that interview matrix, dependent in the country that you're in and what diversity means. Because in some of those countries, it means, as it does in the focus in the UK and the US at the moment, gender and ethnicity are two of our bigger focuses. But in places like Dubai, the nationalisation of gender is their version of diversity. That's the underrepresented group that they want to assess. So the guides are designed to help with that structure, that process, to ensure that consistency. They've also been designed to make it easy for managers, so they're available as a hard copy for the older school managers like myself that like a bit of paper in front of them. They're also built into our ATS, our applicant tracking system, so that they are mirrored. So the managers that are a little bit more tech than I am, and everyone that sees my slides will know that, they're able to use the same format, the same questions to assess those candidates. So managers get a choice of the way they do that and their preference. We're also building out a resourcing guide for people leaders, which sounds really simple, but it's a tool that tries to bring together all of the guidance and information and collateral on each phase of that resourcing life cycle, so that people leaders can be really targeted when they want to know something, when they need that level of support, rather than spending time reading a huge PDF guide. We're also looking to do the same for candidates, so that they can see the process they will go through. They understand the approach in how they will be assessed as a candidate at Standard Chartered. We built and launched a situational judgment test. So an assessment that all candidates, where we're able to use that assessment for compliance and regulatory reasons, go through. It's an additional data point that, again, just provides some additional consistency in the way that candidates are assessed. It's built by a professional outfit, so SHL that Sarah mentioned at Echo use. They're a global organisation that do this stuff all day, every day. they've helped us to put together that situational judgment test to assess candidates and how they align to our values, who we are as an organisation. That also ensures that there's no chance of bias being pulled into that process because it's an automated decision. It's an assessment that's set up that's not scored by individuals. And one of the major pieces of work that we've just completed and rolled out is an on-demand video-based training platform. Now, that training platform is for both recruiters and hiring managers. It's a carefully structured curricula to upskill and build capability across both of those populations and surrounding topics that fit into the things we're talking about today. So mitigating bias in an interview, the spectrum for inclusion, recruiting diversely. All of those things are fundamental to ensure that we have an inclusive and a diverse recruitment process. Now, that for me has probably been the coolest thing that we've done since I've been at Standard Chartered, because for me, it's a massive change in the way we've wanted to go about how we view the role that both recruiters and managers play. You know, we've always talked about diversity and inclusion, but for me, this feels like something we've done that's made a real difference. You know, we've given managers the opportunity to upskill themselves. We've given our recruiters an opportunity to develop themselves to help them better understand the role that they play. And we've sought to try to address some of the biases that I've talked to and that you can see on the slide in front of you. Now, my belief is that all of those things that I've just talked through, and it's not an exhaustive list of things to ensure that we are inclusive, but they will help us to ensure that the process and the recruitment process that we operate helps us to deliver our purpose, helps us to find the best, most diverse candidates. Now, we recognise that journey is not finished. We are still evolving as a function and as an organisation because there's always more that can be done. Now, hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of what we've done to ensure that inclusive recruitment. And for me, it's been a very, very interesting journey over the last couple of years to see the changes that we've thought of and made to ensure that what we do is representative of who we are as an organisation. What I'd like to finish on, if we can just move to the next slide, is just a snippet of some of the tips and hints that can be put into play to help with inclusive and diverse recruitment. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to do the thing that they tell all presenters not to do, and that's I'm going to talk through the things that you can see in front of you, but I'm going to hopefully give a bit more context behind them. So the first of those is define the role. I think it was mentioned by Sarah, understanding skills, responsibilities, what is the actual role that you're looking for rather than focusing on an individual. Can you do things like phone screen? Similar to blind CVs, it removes the chance of bias by that first impression based on what you see in front of you. So actually you get to focus on the skills, the experience that individual has. Structured interviews, for me, hugely important. Consistent, structured interviews, assessing candidates against skills or competencies or strengths, whichever your company is employing as their choice. And everyone normally defines their own, but ensuring that candidates are assessed against the same consistent set of measures. What assessments can you use? And that's not just situational judgment test or the traditional psychometrics. In the more forward-thinking world, gamification. What role can that play to give additional data points that takes away the opportunity for bias to come into play? Panel interviews and diverse interview panels. For me, both of those, again, have been around for a long time, but are still something that I see at organisations that I've been at that aren't always used. Having a panel of interviewers, having some of those individuals, again, as Sarah talked to before, that sit outside of the immediate business or function that you're interviewing for a role. Having them play a particular role, having them focus on particular competencies and skills so that they're not all assessing the same things. Diversity in terms of the interview panel for me is also really important. Having different people that think differently, assessing those candidates. Interview question guides are an absolute given. Some managers I know do not value them, do not think that they are worthwhile, but for me, it ensures that level of consistency. It's the way in which we try to assess the candidates. Diverse hiring teams, having a diverse team. It's easy. Hiring for diversity is easier to do when you've got a diverse team, because there is automatically that diversity of thought. And the last one is a huge one: educational and upskill sessions. However that comes, continuing to educate about the risks that can be fallen into is hugely important. And just having an awareness of bias and the impact it can have, so it's at the forefront of people's thinking, can make a huge difference. Now, none of those things are rocket science. There's no silver bullet to solve for inclusive recruitment. They've all been around for some time. All of these things should be something that an organization uses in one form or another, but embedding them can be really difficult. As I say, we've had a number of these things, but have we been consistent about them in the past and had them operated globally, so that if you were a hiring manager in Singapore that also hired in the UK and in Africa, would you have the same experience from your recruitment team and be given the same advice? No. Is that true now? Yes. No, we've changed the way in which we like to operate. None of these things guarantee inclusive recruitment, but they do go a long way to minimizing the risks of not having it. For me, as a recruiter and as someone that leads a recruitment function, having a team that are able to provide that level of guidance to managers, that partner with managers to act in an advisory capacity to talk to why these things are important, is also massively key. Now, hopefully that's been in some way, shape or form useful, and gives a bit of an overview of what we've been doing at Standard Chartered, what myself and the teams have been focusing on over the last couple of years. And again, would welcome any questions.
Matt, let's be fair to all presenters, and let's move to another presentation now, and we will have an opportunity for discussion after our colleagues from Law Company Viatre will give their speech, as we are already very, very late. So I'm really, really sorry. Of course, I strongly encourage all of the participants to share your opinions and questions both to Matt and Sarah on the chat, and we will still have 15 minutes after the last presentation. Before I ask Anna, Joanna and Rafał to give the presentation, I just wanted to inform you that they will be available for your individual questions 30 minutes after the webinar. So, Anna, Joanna, Rafał, the stream is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. We would like to present our presentation about inclusive recruitment and legal aspects. Could I ask for changing of the slides? Okay. So we would like to start to make some. Okay, we will start our presentation. Diversity and inclusion is a trend we can observe in the society connected to social changes we are all part of. But as lawyers, we would like to start our presentation with a legal definition of inclusion. But unfortunately, there is no such definition in Polish law. This is a typical situation when the law doesn't keep up with the social trends or changes. During our presentation, we are attempting to present law provisions, international and Polish ones, in order to catch legal aspects of and frameworks of inclusion.
And what we would like to emphasize, maybe the most important message of our speech today, is that inclusion is a value. Sarah and Matt already referred to the value itself. I would add that from the legal perspective, inclusion is a value and a goal, which meaning and practical applications are to be reconstructed, basing on the internal policies, court decisions, legal cases, rules of international and state law. This is a value which is just a foundation for building positive, inclusive workplace culture. Given that the law does not reflect the trends, this is leaders' employers' role to ensure that all the internal procedures and policies guarantee a work culture which is free of discrimination, comply with data privacy regulations, and that at the end of the day, a company is prepared for any legal disputes.
Okay, next slide, please. Given the short time, we will briefly touch upon European Union law and Polish law, especially Polish labor law provisions. Our goal is to keep this presentation as informative and helpful, so we would like to share some tips for leaders, for employers on how to create a recruitment process free of discrimination of any kind, and what kind of activities to perform in order to deal with any legal dispute in case it occurs. Then we will discuss the phenomenon of positive discrimination. As mentioned before, we will describe juridical boundaries which constitute only a starting point for creating some internal policies. Please do raise any questions you may have during our speech, especially via chat. We will be happy to answer them after our presentation.
So just to start with the European Union law and briefly point out the most important European legislation passed in order to prevent the discrimination. So starting with the Article 19 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, according to this provision, the Council is allowed to take action to combat discrimination based, as you can see on the slide, on one of the categories, such as sex, racial origin, religion, age, disability, or sexual orientation. Next one, please. And the principle to forbid discrimination was also confirmed in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. According to the Article 20 and 21st, there is established that everyone is equal before the law, and also that the discrimination is forbidden. The next one, please. And then there were a bunch of anti-discrimination directives adopted by the EU. Some of them you can see on the slide. And they all established the framework for equal treatment, including the equal access to the employment and promotion in the workplace, or the prohibition of direct and indirect discrimination. Of course, they all were important, but I would like to focus on the specific one. Next slide, please. And it was the Directive 97/80 EC. And there is a reversed burden of proof established in this directive. And I would like to stop here to explain what the burden of proof is. So the burden of proof determines which party is responsible for putting evidence in order to prevail on their claim. So in simple words, it means that one of the sides of the legal dispute needs to prove that the law was broken. And the general normal rule is that if someone files the lawsuit and wants the court to draw consequences from opponent, he needs to provide the court with the evidences which confirm that the law was broken. This directive was revolutionary because it reversed the burden of proof in discrimination cases. and it changed the whole situation in the court. It means that in case an employee sues the employer, employee just needs to point to indicate the fact or action which in his or her opinion was discriminatory, and then this is the employer, the leader, the company role to provide otherwise, to prove otherwise. So to prove that those practices were in fact not discriminatory and the law was not broken. And this is why we advise our clients to create complex anti-discriminatory procedures, and especially to gather all the documentation during the employment, because this requirement does not flow directly from the law, but it is necessary to be prepared for any legal dispute on this discrimination ground.
Okay, so moving to the Polish law and legal framework for inclusion, it should be pointed out that Polish constitution states the basic rule of equality and non-discrimination. According to Polish Supreme Court, discrimination is inevitably linked to the violation of human dignity, respect for which is not only a legal imperative, but also a moral one. Moving into more specific provisions to be indicated, it is the labor code to be analyzed, especially in the context of recruitment. Article 11, Index 3, strictly prohibits any discrimination in employment and recruitment process, and it contains the open catalogue of the grounds of such discrimination. This open catalogue is similar to the catalogue indicated in European law. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the one more time the rule of equality here regulated in labor code. What's important? A violation of the principle of equal treatment may occur already at the stage of recruitment process. In the judgment from 24th March 2000, the Supreme Court pointed out that there is a possibility to claim compensation in the labor court also by the persons who are not employees within the meaning of the labor code, and even these persons are not related to the respondent employer in any way by any legal bond. So in this decision, the court pointed out that even a job candidate can claim for compensation when he thinks that the job offer may be discriminatory, and if he feels discriminated against him on the ground, for example, as in this case of sex, because in this case male candidate wasn't hired because the job offer indicated only female candidates to take part in this recruitment process.
Mm-hmm. And the general rule, as it was said, is that the situation of the employee cannot be differentiated due to any reason unless this reason is objective. And this article, which you can see on the slide, defines which treatment is understood as discriminatory and also forbids direct, indirect discrimination and sexual harassment. And important to highlight here is that these provisions apply also to recruitment conditions because they apply to establishment of the employment relationship. So they will also apply to the recruitment stage. And the next article, so it's Article 18, Index 3B of Polish Labor Code, indicates the catalogue of violations of equal treatment principle. And to underline here that it also applies to recruitment, including refusal to enter into employment relationship. And as I mentioned before about the burden of proof, it is also reversed based on the Polish Labour Code.
Okay, and the next article, 18 Index 3D, it states the consequences of violation of the principle of equal treatment in employment. But more directly speaking, we should say that it states the consequences of discrimination. And in accordance to this article, a person against whom an employer has violated the principle of equal treatment has the right to compensation of at least the amount of the minimum remuneration for work, which is determined in separate provisions. As we mentioned before, the right to claim for compensation is not reserved for the employees only, but since the provision from the previous slide uses the term a person, it may also refer to candidate for an employee. It should be also stated that in the event of discrimination, a claim may be pursued by the person who felt discriminated, not only against the employer, but also against the wrongdoer, so even another employee of the company. And another provision of Labour Code states the framework of the personal data of the employee and or candidate, job candidate during recruitment process. This states the catalog of the personal data that can be processed by the employer. This article allows to divide all the information about the life and of an employee or the candidate into 4 spheres. These are personal identification, work, personal secret, and private secret. And in accordance with this article, only the data from this 2 first spheres, so the sphere of personal identification and the sphere of work, may be processed during the recruitment process. Next slide, please.
So to sum up the Polish Labour Code provisions, there is prohibition of discrimination, there is an order for equal treatment, there is specified data which may be requested by an employer, and also there is a duty to prevent discrimination, but without specific solutions. And regarding the burden of proof, as I mentioned before, it lies with an employer, as exactly the same as in the European Union law regulations. And all these provisions are just legal boundaries. As there are not specific solutions indicated in the law, it is important to establish complex internal regulations which will guarantee that our company's policy is in line with anti-discrimination law and also with inclusion concept, which, by the way, is much broader than these legal regulations.
Okay, so we would like to move on to tips for inclusive recruitment. But firstly, maybe I will say that in Poland, we have a strong uncertainty of the law, and court proceedings may take even 4 or 5 years. So it is inevitable to be prepared for ongoing basis for any possible claim that could happen. So we would recommend, from this legal point of view, firstly, job advertisement without wording suggesting any discriminatory preferences. Secondly, we would advise that selection of candidates for an interview should be based on objective criteria. Here I would like to say something about Amazon case. This company in 2018 used secret artificial intelligence tool, recruiting tool, that showed bias against women. The company had to withdraw from using this tool, but this case was very broadly discussed. Going to the stage of interview, we would like to advise that questions that are asked during this interview should avoid these personal, private topics, because we have the right to privacy that secures this private sphere of the candidate. For example, a question, how do you intend to reconcile work and raising a child, is absolutely banned. During the interview, the job candidate should also become aware of rules of the recruitment, transparent policy of hiring, and this person should also be provided with a feedback. This is very important because it builds the positive image of the company in the eyes of job candidates. And from this burden of proof point of view, reverse burden of proof, we would also recommend to gather and archive the whole documentary regarding recruitment, including also assessment of the candidate, because in the event of the claim, then the documents would speak for themselves. And more generally speaking, we would advise also to create internal procedures, trainings, best practices, anti-discriminatory contacts. These all ideas would help an employer or the whole organization to build the diverse and inclusive workplace.
This is important to create all the company culture in line with inclusion value, not just the recruitment process. These juridical boundaries are just basics for the inclusive workplace culture. What we advise our clients is to establish this complex and consistent company policy applied not only to recruitment, but to the whole employment. And also regarding to the internal regulations, for instance, if we want to grant any rights to the group of employees due to criteria such as age or sex, or any included in the anti-discriminatory law, it is essential to ensure that it will not put them in the worst position in comparison to other employees. Because if the legal dispute occurs, the court will examine whether they are logical and if there was or was not the indirect or direct discrimination. And to finishing our speech today, I will just briefly refer to the only but in the anti-discrimination field, which is positive discrimination. According to the Court of Justice of the European Union, positive discrimination is the only exception when differentiating of people's situation due to reasons such as sex or nationality is possible. Positive discrimination means to put a person in a better position, for instance, in order to make women and men representation equal if one group is underrepresented. And what's important is that Polish Supreme Court agreed with this interpretation of the law.
Okay, to sum up, despite the fact that regulations are not keeping up with the trend and are not clear enough, they don't give solutions directly, the candidates for employees pay high attention to ethical and inclusive recruitment, so it is worth taking care of an inclusive culture of workplace. Under taking care of inclusion in the workplace, we understand keeping up with the standards, even higher than this indicated in legal provisions, what is a continuous process in any organization. But but this process may result in creating a positive image of an organization on the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was extremely interesting, and we still have, even if we were a little bit late at the beginning, for the discussion and Q&A session. So, any questions from the participants and both our speakers? Maybe Sarah and Matt would like to add something to the last presentation on comment now when we have the Q&A session. That happens sometimes when we receive such an extensive portion of knowledge that there are not a lot of questions. But still, maybe. As I shared with you, our legal team is ready to stay with us 30 minutes after the webinar. If you have any individual questions or topics you would like to discuss with them. In the meantime, if there are no any other questions, or comments to the presentations, I would like to thank you very much, all our presenters, for preparing this absolutely interesting content for us. Of course, the content will be available together with the link to the video from the webinar after the presentation. We will send it today in the afternoon. I strongly encourage you to engage in all our activities. As I presented earlier during the meeting, our next topic starts from May, and you can share your story, you can share your case study, you can submit through the call for papers your case study. And in the meantime, I would like to also ask Sarah, Matt, and our team to say the final words to our participants. Thank you again from ABSL team. Sarah?
Sorry, just taking myself off mute. Hello, everyone. Yeah, equally, just want to say thank you so much. I think that was a really interesting session. It's great to hear perspectives from everyone else. It's always good to understand what others are doing in this space and whether you're aligned or whether you're not aligned. So thank you for giving me the chance to speak to everyone. And I would just say, if you go away and have any questions that you think of later, please feel free to connect directly, obviously through LinkedIn. I'm happy to share my email details as well with the team. So I'd be more than happy to pick up on any discussions after this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And if you don't mind, we will share your email address together with the presentation.
That's fine.
Matt?
Yeah, just a massive thank you for the opportunity to come and talk today. Again, if anyone has any follow-up questions, my details will be provided out. If anyone would like to get in contact, please do so.
Thank you.
So,
and, but not least, our friends from the law company.
yes, thank you for the possibility to take part of that great webinar. From our point of view, the scope of the material is much broader than 20 minutes, so we were running very fast. And we understand that there are some circumstances, some questions which cannot be asked publicly. So we will leave our email addresses, and we are very open to answer your questions in private. So if there will be some questions, please do write us. We will answer as soon as possible.
Thank you. We will provide your email address as well together with the presentation. Once again, thank you very much. We will stop recording right now. So if there is anyone who would like to stay with you, I strongly encourage you. Thank you again, and see you soon during our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.